Hey, we're here and we're back on the Scaling Secrets podcast. Dylan Gambardella is here. Now, Dylan is an entrepreneur. He's a health and fitness enthusiast, an angel investor, and a keynote speaker. But why is he here? Well, he is here because he's passionate about using technology to solve meaningful problems. And he has founded companies in the future of work and the ed tech spaces. He has an excellent book out called Now That's Momentum. He's a Forbes 30 Under 30 honoree, featured in Forbes, Adweek, Entrepreneur, CNBC, USA Today, and so many more. And so Dylan is going to let us in on what he does very well, which is growing companies, which is getting that user base and scaling it and going from idea to reality, which is easier said than done, but Dylan's done it and he's going to help us out. So Dylan, how the heck are you today?
Robert, it is amazing to be with you here today. Thanks so much for having me. Excited to dive in.
All right, well, let's dive in. And what am I missing out on? When I gave you your bio, gave you introduction, there is kind of the resume there. But as far as just what has you super energized, pumped up, etc., what gets you out of bed in the morning these days?
Man, there is nothing better, I'd say, than getting to brainstorm with fellow entrepreneurs. One of my favorite things, Robert, is getting in the arena. I think a lot about just the act of doing when it comes to entrepreneurship. Now, don't get me wrong, sometimes you're doing the wrong thing, and we'll talk maybe about some of the failures and learnings about how I stumbled into that. But beyond that, I love getting to spend time with my family, my friends, fellow entrepreneurs, talking about business. It's a crazy time in our world. I'm sure your listeners will catch this, at least those in the US, whether it's political or not. We won't get into that today, but I find that the business world is almost a escape from the craziness of reality, and it's not an easy one all the times, but I'll choose these challenges over some others.
100%. And there's like a clear divide, right? There's kind of I hate to use the term average, but there's people out there that are scrolling social media, on the apps, glued to the news, reality TV, and that's all great in moderation, entertainment. But then there's also this other half of the coin of building something, of having a project, of changing lives, of working with people, of kind of doing the hard things and maybe having somewhat of a delayed gratification, right? Of like sacrificing now and putting in your focus and like pushing yourself beyond your limits and strengthening the muscle and all those metaphors, so that way you can create something great and you can enjoy what there is to enjoy in life without having to always struggle or stress yourself out over the kind of the day-to-day things that maybe don't serve you. And so you have built some companies that do some pretty cool stuff, that have a lot of people, that have grown at just amazing rates. So what do you have to share with us out of these companies you've created? What's one that's worth talking about and how does it stand out?
I'll give your audience a quick tactical piece of learning just based on what you said. I'm all about the tactics, right? I know that we listen to a lot of podcasts, folks who are in this audience. One thing that changed my life from a passive consumption, if you will, and I was doing what you said, Robert. I found myself opening Instagram, opening Twitter, whatever the app might be, and just doom scrolling. And then I downloaded ClearSpace. I have no affiliation at all with the company, but ClearSpace, if you're not familiar, you have to have a mindful moment before using the app. It hits you with a deep breath in, a deep breath out. It guides you through that. And then an inspirational quote about the sanctity of time. And so the whole thing takes about 20, 30 seconds. But that removal, let alone the inspirational quote about something to do with time being the most precious asset we have, there's no chance I want to scroll Instagram after that, right? So I like that. I recommend that if anybody's struggling with the concentration piece. Technology's tough. But back to your question, Robert. I have been building in, as you said in the intro, really what I'd call the career space for the last decade of my life. I started my first business when I was in school at Duke University. We built a company called Next Gen Summit, really an in-person media model around conferences, events, even some community, smaller scale workshops and dinners, all focused on the pursuit of entrepreneurship. I knew at 18 that I loved the idea of business, probably from my high school days of selling lollipops to my classmates. But I wanted to meet other entrepreneurs, others doing a, let's call it non-traditional path. And that could be sports athletes, that could be artists and scientists. Surrounded by my friends at Duke, I love them to death, but a lot of them were focused on banking and consulting, and nothing wrong with that. Just something that I was interested in was entrepreneurship and business. And we built that community ourselves, scaled that up to over 10,000 event attendees over the first few years, a few million in revenue, completely bootstrapped. with significant profit margins, almost 50% by the end. Sadly, that business came to a conclusion during the pandemic when events became a little bit tough to host in person. But we were able to take those learnings and really identify an opportunity to same problem, a similar space in career development, but tackle it from a digital perspective. That led us to launch Next Gen Skills in 2021 to 2022 by taking a short form, very much so next gen focus, if you will, on career development. So we would help young people, professionals, but also students build skills like communication, like problem solving. If you think about the soft skills, the human skills that you don't really learn in the classroom, we wanted to give everybody a leg up. So when they started that first job or launched a company, they didn't have to guess at how do I talk to my boss? Or what do I say to my colleagues? And how do I handle conflict internally? All the things that you hopefully will learn with time, or if you have a good mentor. We just wanted to ensure that you had a bit of that experience. And that actually led to the birth of another product called The Job for Me, which took a recruiting approach to the whole skills process. We had our young people building skills, improving themselves, developing their careers. And then we added the recruiting tool on top at the end to help them now take those new skills that they've just been learning and building and apply that in the job search. That tool, when we launched it in 2023, grew to over 100,000 users before the first year, and all organic, $0 spent. We can talk about some of the strategies we use on social and through influencer marketing and whatnot. But just an incredible experience to, number one, learn from your customers. We did a lot in the form of A/B testing. We really leaned into the data and took a data-driven approach to our outcomes. And that led to the success that we realized. So most recently now exploring some opportunities in the performance and sports space, something that's near and dear to my heart, working with some athletes to think about what a data-driven approach to health and fitness could look like. But we can save that because there's a long journey over my entrepreneurial career, although I just turned 28. So in many ways, I believe I'm just getting started, but having fun, learning, failing, screwing it up, and just getting up the next day to keep on going.
Nice. Well, there's a lot there, and I can tell your passion and excitement kind of bleed through the screen here about that. And I like how like one sort of failure leads to the next success, right? Like those sort of pivot points. The doing the event app kind of pandemic hits you, so then you're going to pivot then into something else. And you're mentioning a lot here about having like a good circle of people. And also, I have sort of a software background, and it's kind of it's an urge you have to fight because it's easy to like get stuck in a box, right? And like just make the interface and make the features and do what excites you. But then it's a lesson I have to always remind myself of, like, put it out there, test it, see how others use it, and like look over the shoulder in whatever way that you can and see where they expect something to be or something they expect it to do. And just kind of, it's like a iterative sort of back and forth, almost an obsession of just improving what you have created. And so this whole idea that you mentioned here of like growing the user base, right? You mentioned a little bit of like social media and influencer marketing, and that's huge, right? I mean, think of how many amazing apps and software programs have crashed and burned and died, or maybe we don't even know about because they haven't put that marketing aspect into place. And so what is your mindset going into that? You say, okay, well, we have this app, we want to get 100,000 people using it by in a week and 30 days. How do you go about solving that problem?
I wish I had the playbook for 30 days or a week to 100,000. There are people out there who have that playbook, and I'm sure, Robert, you've had them on this podcast, or you will. But I could not agree more with the iterative process you described. I'll talk about first the experience launching Next Gen Skills. So we started the company late 21, launched our first MVP in 2022. Now, that was mistake number one. We spent about 9-10 months from day one of starting development to launch. That was almost a year. And over that year, we had great ideas, right? Our teammates, my partners, we all got around a table, the whiteboard, we were building off of each other. And look, we had a pretty good insight into the market. So we thought we were pretty accurate. And then when launch came, by the day we put the app out, we immediately knew, just based on 9-10 months of thinking, that we wanted to change half of it. And then we had our first customer feedback and iteration. And they told us we had to change the other half of it. And so we went back to the drawing board, completely rebuilt the app, and spent another 6 months before we put the second one out there. When I zoom out and look at that year and a half, let's call it, Robert, I am embarrassed, not because the products weren't great. Of course, they had to get better, and they did over time. And ultimately, I'm very proud of where we ended up 3-4 years later. But I'm embarrassed about our approach to iterating in a bubble. We did not let the market help us out. We almost were playing entrepreneurship on hard mode. We're in a market where we need consumer feedback, and we didn't give ourselves the opportunity to embrace that. What I wish we had done is done 10% of the development and then shipped that, even if it was to a select few, even if we had to give that app away for free to some design partners. We would have learned so much. And then a month later, ship an update or add the second feature and ship that. But do it iteratively and not wait until we thought we had the perfect product, because ultimately the market is the best teacher. And I'm not the first one to say that. You've heard that before. When we came around the second time with that recruiting tool, we called it the Job for Me, which is still out there. And anybody out there who's looking for an opportunity or somebody who's in the recruiting space, go check it out, completely free. Although there is a paid version. Message me and we could get your code. But when we were starting that app, we just said, what's the simplest feature that we can get out there, and let's ship it. We did so. And then we reached out to every one of the customers who joined and asked them if we could just talk to them for 10 minutes, answer their questions via email if you don't want to hop on live. We spent, shout out to Malachi and our team, probably 100 hours that first month or two, just speaking with users and coming up with ideas. And again, I believe that it's not always about listening to your customer. It's not always about listening to your teammates. It's a version of a mix of both, right? A hybrid. You have to trust your gut, because as the entrepreneur, as the founding team, you believe something or see something that others don't. So you can't listen to the feedback you get always. But it's a really important tool to use. And we take that feedback, make some changes, and ship it again. And this was the first time that we truly embraced A/B testing in our product development. A very easy example. We were stuck with landing page ideas. We had two different concepts. One was a very simple flow. You put your LinkedIn profile in, you hit go, we did the rest for you. Then we had this idea of, let's ask the user for more. Let's get them bought in. Let's ask for maybe name or interest or career path and maybe 5, 6, 7 steps before you hit go and get the job results. There were obvious pros and cons to each, maybe accuracy versus time to value. And we were jamming and fighting, and one person on this team, one person on that team. And then I think it was probably Malachi, give him the credit. He said, let's just every second someone lands on the page, show them a different landing page. Let's run this for a week and let's look at the results. And we did that. And so if you went to the landing page at 5:16 and 31 seconds, you'd see version A. 5:16 and 32 seconds, you'd see version 2, version B. And we just looked at the data. And we found that of, let's say, 1,000 users on each, there was a significant difference as to who converted to end up going through and engaging with the product they were shown after they hit enter. And guess what? That's what we went with, right? That was a decision. And if you like that, if that was your idea, great. And if not, well, you have data to tell you otherwise. I really believe in the concept of having strong convictions, but loosely held. And data, I think, is the key to learning. And we just really embraced that style of product development. Did we always get it right? Of course not. But I think tactics like that, and again, listening to the audience, getting time with the consumers, spending the minutes, the hours, conversing, asking questions, seeking feedback, even when folks didn't want to give it, right? Finding more organic ways to gain that insight, heat mapping, looking at how engagement patterns are on the actual site, email deliverability, replies, clicks, all that jazz, tracking the data in a purposeful manner. I think that was the reason that, fast forward a few more months, we ended up surpassing the 100,000 user count.
Very cool. Well, you're using multiple tools in the toolbox, right? It's like if you're eating something, sometimes you use the fork or the knife or the spoon. And so what I'm getting from just kind of putting the pieces of your journey together is, sometimes when you meet with your team and figure something out, sometimes that is useful, right? Like there's the Henry Ford saying, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. So sometimes your team has to say, hey, I know the public's used to faster horses, but we're going to try this car on them. And then it seems like tool number 2 is then putting it out there and having those lengthy conversations, but 10 minutes conversations, but having on a large scale, and then kind of putting the repeat patterns together. So that's tool number 2. And then tool number 3 seems to be just seeing how it is received, right? You're talking about the A/B testing and the email clicks and the heat mapping and all those other things. And it seems like we have this failure if we just kind of like use too much of one tool or the wrong tool for the wrong job. Like, I don't know about you, but it drives me crazy when when you see like message board discussion and someone says like, well, what should I do on my landing page? And there's like, oh, just split test it, just A/B test it. It's like, well, hey, that's not the universal solution for everything. But it is fun to hear about the adventure, and especially this idea of if you'd put the app out earlier, then it might have been like a little scarier, a little riskier, but also maybe a little more fun. And then you would have gotten maybe to the failures faster, but then also to the successes after that faster as well. And so as far as, I mean, you kind of explained this rocky road here, but was there any point where you just like felt like giving up, or you're like so stressed, you were like, that's it, I'm over? Was there like a moment like that along the way?
I appreciate how you simplify and clarify, Robert, all of those learnings. And to the failure perspective, micro instances every single day. Right? I think as an entrepreneur, we experience this roller coaster where on a Monday, we can close our biggest deal, right? A $250,000 deal, a $500,000 deal comes through. Like, I'm the man. We're crushing it. We're going to be $1 billion business, no doubt in my mind. And then Tuesday, your most talented team member says they're going to leave and start their own company, right? And while you're happy for them, you're also heartbroken that you're going to lose this talent, but you want to celebrate them. And it's this mix of highs and lows. But the most immediate point in that journey that comes to mind when you ask was during the pandemic. Going back, 2019, we had our biggest year ever from events. We had a few dozen events across the US, actually a few dozen international as well, that we had this chapter model. It was amazing to see folks run with the brand and welcome their own folks, dozens and hundreds of different attendees around the world. And then the pandemic hits in March. And granted, we had a few months prior to that put down deposits on venues for the 2020 and even some in 2021 calendar years that totaled around $500,000. And all of a sudden, we watched as event after event was canceled, and without our say. So, for example, our annual conference, Next Gen Summit, was here in New York in my backyard in the city, and we watched as a $250,000 venue was absolutely gone. Right? They said, "Oh, we'll do it in the fall." Great. So we postponed to the fall, and then the fall came around, and you couldn't host events there anymore. So it was like, okay, maybe winter, postponed to winter, and then 2021 came around, can't host events, and that was a really hard realization. We went about a year, Robert, waiting and trying to bide time. And we were playing around with the digital event space, but I knew in my heart of hearts that it wasn't where my passion was. It was very crowded. If you think back to spring and summer of 2020, there was a digital event every other day, right? You were getting invited from your mom, your coworker, everybody was inviting you to some digital event, a Zoom party. And I just didn't want to compete in the market. I didn't see the opportunity to make the impact that we so desired. We weighed everything from closing the business, saying what a great run it was, what an amazing first company we started. We were weighing this idea of taking a digital approach and an early version of what became Next Gen Skills. But I didn't know, quite frankly, if that was the best path for us either. Ultimately, I realized that as entrepreneurs, you probably will never know. If it's obvious what the right answer is, it's probably been taken or done a few times over. There's always going to be some level of risk involved if it's worth doing, right? And we decided to gamble and go for it and, raise some capital, build this digital business, reinvent our team. We had a very much so event-focused team, marketing heavy, community. We did not have folks on full-time engineering resources, developers, and we had to go build those assets and find leaders and find entrepreneurs in their own rights to come aboard and take our mission and make it their own and build it with us. And that was an amazing and powerful journey. Also led to recruiting my big sister from her fancy corporate job where she was making a lot more money to come and join Little Bro and do the startup thing, which has been and continues to be the most rewarding journey itself. But it's amazing in hindsight to look back and say that it was worth it. But at the time, Robert, it was very unclear, right? I did not know what was in our best interest. I didn't know how we were going to have a payroll in a few months, right? Thankfully, we never were looking at days or weeks, but it got close and it got scary and ultimately worked out. But it is quite the journey, rewarding, daunting. I'd like to say that I counteract the stress with exercise and nutrition and whatnot, but it also probably took a year or so off my life. But that's how it goes, right? We all make that choice actively, very much so.
And either way, you're on an adventure. And what I like a lot about what you said there is that you will never know for sure what the absolute 100% correct decision is, even afterwards. Like, maybe I could have, should have, would have done that. Like you go through the data, you examine the possibilities. And I'm always impressed when there's this sort of fast action, right? Like you mentioned earlier about this idea of like rebuilding the landing page or the funnel. And so many times you see when something in a business, either it isn't working or it's just working okay, and someone just does something crazy and you're just like, whoa, like they're on to something now. I mean, you think about like the iterations of some of this Apple stuff when people were just like what? They're not going to let you remove the battery. They're not going to have a power button. They're going to do this with the USB cord. It's always like just these kind of shocking moments. And I'm always looking to tap into that. And then but then it's always so easy when you talk about like taking a risk to fall into the usual kind of like sports motivational platitudes, right? The cliches. And so do you have anything to share with us non-cliche about taking these risks, about kind of doing the scary things? What have you learned?
The most important rule in entrepreneurship, according to me and my 10 years of experience, if you will, starting companies, is to just get started. I know it does have a bit of that cliche element because you've heard it before, but it truly is what most challenges come down to. The classic cliche would be our greatest fears lie in anticipation. And I think that's true. But when it comes to entrepreneurship, what I would go back and do a million times faster in every iteration, even in the latest where we are moving in and at a fast rate and shipping product to learn from the market, I would get out there and do the thing as opposed to debating or thinking, and find the minimal viable product that would dictate yes or no. I think we lose some of the science experiment feeling of entrepreneurship thanks to, and maybe it's not all for the better, but venture capital as one resource, they change the equation for what I think a startup should be, which is ultimately a bet. A startup and entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs have a thesis, a hypothesis as to what the world could be or what an opportunity might look like. And like any hypothesis in science, go back to our 8th grade biology days, the goal is not to be correct, but it's to find out, was hypothesis right or wrong, right? It's not for your hypothesis to be proven true. It's just to get to yes or no. And I think we lose that a lot with early stage companies specifically. We really try to make this thing work and push it all and ignore the signs that the market is telling us when it's not. And that's where the famous word pivot comes in, right? I like to think of them as just hypotheses that were not correct, but that we did the thing and we got to know, which is success. I wish more investors talked about early stage startups that way. I think it would almost alleviate some of the existential threat that comes with starting a company. And again, there's a healthy amount of that is needed, right? I don't think we should be raising $10 million and going out there and saying, we got to know it was a no, so done, see you later, thanks for your cash. I'm not promoting that by any means, but I do think that getting started and going for clear indications of yes or no, and whatever that means to your specific example, that should be the goal. And everything else is noise. The ego, the awards, they're fun. And yeah, it's nice to celebrate at times. But truthfully, they're just, indications along the journey, and they can be distracting if you let them. I think what matters is building. What matters is profitability. What matters is unit economics. And if you have those things, keep going. If not, maybe that's the pivot turn. Maybe that's the reassess. Maybe that is, hey, are we ignoring the obvious here that just didn't work? Because we've all, as entrepreneurs, been in cases, whether companies or product lines or features even, where we have tried to force something that just wasn't meant to be. I'm guilty of that times 10. I think what I have, the bicep curl, if you will, that I've built up over time is trying to take an objective approach. That's where data can really help, right? We made the joke about A/B testing not being, the end all be all fix to our problems. But I think we agree that it can be part, right? Acquiring data and looking at results can be one indicator of, is this telling me my hypothesis was correct or not? And so if we take that approach, I think we'll find that more businesses are getting to the success or the failure, which frees up entrepreneurship and creators to go build the next thing that might be the better bet, and hopefully spend less time wallowing in the despair of the purgatory that's somewhere between.
Well, it's a lot to think about. And I think that we could all use just some introspection like this. And I think when you're mentioning some of these things, what comes to mind is like setting good goals and having your scope kind of the right size, right? Because if your scope is too big and you're like, oh, we'll change the world, oh, maybe we'll launch it at the minimum viable product in 9 months. But then if your scope is too small, then you won't really go for it. So you have it in the right size, and then you can put out these experiments like you're saying and see if your hypotheses are true, and just kind of having these small wins or losses and getting there. And so as far as what you've been doing in those most recent years, right? You've been growing, expanding, building those teams, hiring people for this and that. What do you have to share with us today about what you learned about scaling and just dealing with the people and the hierarchy and the mass quantities? Like, what kind of scaling secrets do you have for us today?
I'm a big proponent of EOS, Entrepreneur's Operating System, which, Robert, I'd imagine you or guests have either used or are familiar with. I first read Traction, the book that Gino and team put out probably, I want to say maybe 5-6 years ago when we were early days of building. And I didn't really love how many meetings there were and what are these things called rocks and what's a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. Like, okay, I kind of see that. But it is so true. And going back to what you just said, Robert, and framing the question, you have to find the balance between keeping your feet on the ground, like doing the work that needs to be done today, but always thinking high level, right? And that's where, I don't want to say your head's in the clouds, but you have to keep it to the big, hairy, audacious reason you started this thing in the first place. And so when we were building next gen skills, I would beat that drum so hardly in the early days for our team to let them know, yeah, we don't have a product in the market, but we're going to reinvent how young people prepare for work. We're going to reinvent what workforce development looks like and make it fun and engaging. Right? We're going to be the people that no one wants to stop using, as opposed to every other freaking career app that people hate and delete and click through because their boss told them to do it. No, we're going to change that dynamic. Did we completely reinvent careers? No. But do we have clients like Capital One using our product? Yeah. And that's pretty awesome, right? That's a version of success. We got a long way to go until we maybe hit that big, hairy, audacious goal. But I think things like EOS can have a framework. And for me, I learned a long time ago that I have a lot of weaknesses as a visionary. I have a lot of strengths, but I have a lot of weaknesses. And one of those is taking ideas, taking my vision and codifying it in a way that can disseminate and reach individual contributors, even managers across the company. And when we were building a team and going from 5 people to 10 people to 20 people, that became more and more of an issue. And leaning into structure and having an integrator, conveniently my big sister, who was our COO, is our COO of that business, she had the task of making sure that she and I spent time together to make sure that I had everything that I wanted to share written down, alignment forward, in a way that actually could be interpreted by our people, right? It's one thing to say something. It's another thing for it to actually be understood. And that was a big learning for me, right? The way my brain works, I'm pretty much theoretical, I'd say. And I'm able to just take things for granted that I move quickly when that's not how everybody works, nor is it in everybody's best interest when you're moving fast and breaking things, right? You have to lean into tools. So I think while frustrating at the beginning, because heck, it slowed us down a little bit, EOS and some framework around that, it could be a version of EOS, it can be a whole different operating system. I'm sure there are a million out there that I might just not be familiar with. But that is something that I would recommend for all folks who are in the pains of growing. I remember hearing from a friend who started Jopwell when they were scaling from 5 to 10 to 20 and beyond. He said every time you double, everything breaks. Every system, every tool, every communication. And I was like, not really. Like 5 to 10, what's that different? And then I did it and everything broke, right? And people were like, dude, what's going on here? Why are we not on the same page? I don't feel updated. I don't feel in the loop. And we had to do that again and again. And at 20, same thing happened. So I think finding structure, and it might take a little bit to really embrace that. And so that's where you have to be the judge of sticking with it and really maybe brute forcing it at the beginning and knowing whether it's right or wrong for your people and your culture. But I could not agree more with the idea of a framework. Even if at the beginning it's like a weekly all hands, right? Whatever that is, where you have an agenda is shared the morning of, people have a few hours to hop in and familiarize themselves. If that is all it is, great. Then as you scale and as the problems get harder, you get to find the next iteration of that. And there are so many experts out there, so many podcasts and resources for free available online. Blessed to have Gino Wickman himself as an investor in our company. And so that has been a nice resource to be able to go to the pro and the expert, although he's quite the busy man. So, I don't want to put that pressure on him any more so than we deserve. But that was game changing for us and definitely a tool for anybody who's in the throes of scaling or anticipating that coming soon.
100%. And whenever this idea comes across of like, well, do I need a framework? Do I really need like a structure, a schedule, any kind of like order to offset the chaos? Like, you're an athlete, you know how it can be where like if you're just kicking a ball around, like kicking a kickball, throwing a football around, I guess that's fun. But if you have like actual rules and actual structure, it's kind of difficult at first, but then the fun output at the end is like it's like times 10, right? It's on a whole other order of magnitude. And it's just like this weird thing how the structure gets to that next level. And like you're mentioning about things breaking, it seems like there's bad breaking and there's good breaking, right? It's good if something's breaking if you're exceeding capacity, but then it's easy to kind of misunderstand and think like, oh, well, are things falling apart just under their own weight? And you're like, no, it's breaking because we're expanding, we're getting bigger. And there's like a little bit of like a split personality you're even mentioning here, right? Of like there's the like wanting to change the world and saying like we're gonna affect everyone does this, but then also like doing the work and getting these things done. And so yeah, EOS comes up a lot with some of these guests that come across. And so in our last few minutes here, I just want to make sure that we cover the bases. You mentioned about you, your stories, your company, and all these things that you've accomplished. What are you yet to accomplish? And is there some kind of question in our conversation that I'm not asking that you wish I'm asking? I'm sorry to hit you with two questions at once, but just want to be efficient.
I think the piece I'd like to say at the end is working on things that you're curious about personally. I did not fully account for at the beginning of my career. And by the way, I think that is significantly more encompassing than just the problem space that you're tackling. For example, something I did not account for is who you're selling to, right? With some of my first companies, we were spending almost all of our time in the go-to-market phase of getting to know and interview our customers and our stakeholders. And you got to make sure that you really enjoy the people that you're selling to. The people who get excited by your mission and join your team, it's a given that you're going to have something in common, right? Especially the early stages. They're going to join not because of the pay, right? Unless you're raising $10 million at the gate, they're joining because they believe in what you're doing, at least to a certain extent. And the equity upside, all that good jazz. But think about who you're selling to. Think about who you're trying to reach, who your audience is. Those are the people that ultimately might dictate more so your enjoyment 2 years in, 5 years in. And yeah, I know we're all motivated by things like financial gain. I am, right? I'll be the first to tell you that I have monetary goals. Speaking of things I've yet to reach, I have a number that I'm building toward, and I am not there yet. I'm excited to be on that journey. That's part of it for me, and we should talk about that more. Although there are other elements that we don't account for when we get excited by an idea. We have a product vision. We can just see it happening. We want to achieve it. There's a lot more to that equation. And beyond that, I think, Robert, that my goal is to meet other entrepreneurs and to always be learning. Getting to speak to folks like yourself, the community that is listening to this podcast, the other speakers that you've had on, they're just the most fun conversations. Even if you're building in, laundromats, right? Something very different than education or career development. I'm sure we can find similarities. I'm sure my experience will lend a hand to what you're building and vice versa. And I love those opportunities. And again, it goes back to my roots, right? The first business I built was a community effectively. And that is something I continue to enjoy. Maybe one day I'll get back in there, but until then, enjoying every bit of the journey.
I love it. And some of these things that you're mentioning they're like what they told us when we were kids. And then when we were teenagers, young adults, we forgot some of these things, right? That you should actually enjoy the people that are around you and love what you do. And you have a company, you have customers. You shouldn't hate your customers. They should excite you. You should be amazed and wowed at what they're doing to improve their own lives. and you should love learning, and especially learning of all forms, and be curious, and all those other things but it's just like sometimes it's easy to get beaten down by the world and forget about just these very important lessons. And I also want to squeeze in, we're already over time, but just in these last couple of minutes, you mentioned about how you kind of have this new company that you're growing that's built around the fitness space. So we only have like a couple of minutes, but can you tell us about that quickly?
Yeah, for sure. And for anybody who's interested, you can check out on Instagram or on our domain, but we're at The Different Lab on Instagram, and you'll see that we are aiming to quantify, basically take a sports science approach to health and fitness. I believe that we should measure what matters, the whole concept behind OKRs, right? Objectives and key results that a lot of us in this entrepreneurship world abide by. I think I want to do the same thing in health, because few things matter more than our health. And whether it's you or a family member or a parent, or goodness forbid, you've had somebody pass, we all know how precious and our lives are, and eating the right things, getting the right exercise in. I know I'm motivated by numbers, and so I like to get a baseline of my strength, my mobility, things like VO2 max testing, blood work, DEXA scans for body fat and muscle mass. If we can have a baseline, then I got a goal, right? If you tell me I'm at X today and I want to improve, great. I'm going to go work 3 months, and I'll come back, test again, see, did I get better? Did I get worse? And if I got better, I know that plan is working. Let's double down. And if not, if I stayed the same, or goodness forbid went backwards, let's make those changes. Let's get back in the lab and go forward. So I believe in, again, measuring what matters. I think health should be, if certainly not the exception, but the number one example of that. And we want to help people do that at scale. So very early in the journey, we're in New York getting started. So if you're in the area, you want to come by the lab, get some of your metrics, let's chat. We'd love to have you. And hopefully we'll be at a lab by you soon in the years ahead.
Very cool. You're up to some amazing stuff. What a time to be alive, right? With the technology and all the data and ability to store it and find conclusions and apply logic. I mean, it's so cool. And it's hard to keep up with just on a daily basis, all of the innovations that are happening. But that's why we have things like podcasts, right? You should just like take it all in and see what sticks, and to stay up to speed as much as we can just about what's possible, what's happening, and what's coming, and how it affects our lives and our businesses and our logic and everything else. And so as far as you yourself, Mr. Dylan Gambardella, and your companies, what are some next steps here? How can someone find out more about you, contact you, check out these companies, these apps? What are some calls to action?
I would love to catch up with anybody. Feel free to reach out. LinkedIn, I'm at Dylan Gambardella on LinkedIn. You could search that up there, or my name, Dylan Gambardella. I'm on X. You can hit me at DYL Gambardella. Sadly, my name is too long for the full handle there. And then, of course, on Instagram, as we talked about. Would love to catch up with anybody. We're going to be putting out some good content in the weeks and months ahead for sure. So stay tuned and reach out if I can be helpful at any level, way, shape, or form along your journey.
Very cool. Dylan Gambardella on those platforms. And right before we sign off, wrap up here, Mr. Dylan, it's time to put you on the spot. I like to ask my guests for a fun quote or lesson after having all these it's like when you have like a big heavy meal, and at the end you have a little dessert or a cup of coffee. So it's time for the kind of after meal little treat. So in treat terms, what do you have for us as far as a fun quote or lesson?
Thank you for buying me some time there, Robert. I appreciate that. And I just bought myself some more.
Of course.
My favorite quote is the man in the arena, and I'll change to the person in the arena. But it's the person in the arena who is worthy of our respect. And if you're listening to this podcast, if you know Robert and you know what he's about in this community, you certainly fit that. Check that box, fit that bill. You're doing the thing, and you are worthy of all the respect in the world. And yeah, people are not going to understand, right? When I was getting started as a young guy, my parents, they were always supportive, but maybe didn't always understand. My friends, they had no freaking clue, right? They're like, oh, okay, I guess the entrepreneurship thing is cool. And you're going to face people like that, right? Customers say no, investors say no. Every iteration, it's going to have failure. But you're doing the thing, and that is the utmost rewarding, important piece of the journey. So you're the man in the arena, you're the woman in the arena, you're the person in the arena. I appreciate that. I see you. I'm with you. We're grinding out here together, and that's what's going to make it all worthwhile at the end.
I love it. You're playing the game. Massive respect to you. So Dylan Gambardella, check him out on LinkedIn and those platforms. If those apps sounded interesting, exciting to you, then check those out. And it's been a blast It's been a roller coaster, as we've been using that term, Dylan, speaking with you. Really appreciate what you had to offer us and make us think about, make us do, and keep on trucking.
I appreciate you, Robert. I'll catch you soon. Take care, everybody.